and now b3, and of course black wins. B captures, bishop captures, and after this captures here, you will not be able to move this rook for the rest of your game. And there are so many ways to win this for black. The simplest one is just bring your king over to a2, win the rook, and white is helpless to stop it. So also sorry about that for not mentioning it. It is an important line. I was going to mention it, but like I said, I just forgot. So that's about the previous video. But now we return to this video. Carlsen versus Nakamura with the white pieces were really an exciting game, so let's just check it out. Magnus opens with d4 with knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, and d5. We have the queen's gambit declined. Knight to c3 and bishop to e7. With bishop to f4, Magnus continues in the same fashion as he did against Fabiano Caruana in their 2018 World Chess Championship match, with castles by Nakamura, and now e3. Again, following the game Carlsen versus Caruana in, for example, game 2 in the World Chess Championship match 2018 in London. c5 by Nakamura, d captures on c5, bishop captures on c5, and now a3. With knight to c6, okay, it's a bit different because here instead of a3, Magnus went queen to c2, but again we transposed into the same game they played in London. A3, knight to c6, and now queen to c2, so the position is the same. The difference is here Fabiano played queen to a5 in London, and then we had the very exciting line where Fabiano surprised Magnus with rook to d8, the very old line he basically rejuvenated and brought into the World Chess Championship. But here Nakamura goes rook to e8. It's a line that he's known to play, but it's also a line that Magnus knows very well, and it's basically why I chose this title for this video, because here we have bishop to g8, now fighting for the center, controlling the knight here as it's pinned, with bishop back to e7 by Nakamura, and here we have rook to d1. And here there's only one game that was played in this line up until this moment, and it is in fact Viswanathan Anand versus Carlsen 2014 in Sochi, Russia, the World Chess Championship match, game 8, which ended in a draw. But it's very interesting, Nakamura chose to play this line against Carlsen, and well, I don't know, who would know this line better than Carlsen? Even though Carlsen had the black pieces in that game, Anand had the white pieces. But okay, here we have queen to a5, the same move Carlsen played against Anand in the 2014 World Chess Championship match. We haven't covered that game as we only covered their 2013 match where Magnus won his title. We haven't covered the 2014 one, but we will at some point, and probably when I will be doing that match, we will mention this game, you know, just for fun. With bishop to d3, here Magnus plays the same line, the same move Anand played against him in the 2014 World Chess Championship match, and here we have a bit of a difference. Here we have h6 by Nakamura, which is, in that game Carlsen played h6 against Anand, but here we have d captures on c4, so Nakamura plays a new move. And okay, with bishop captures on c4, with h6 now, asking the bishop where you're going to go. Do you want to go to f4? Do you want to go to h4? Or maybe you want to capture on f6. Of course, you don't want to capture on f6, give up your bishop pair. So with bishop to f4, and now bishop to d7, Nakamura continues developing. With castles by Magnus, and now rook a to c8. A very nice move, aligning your rook with the queen on c2, also with the bishop on c4 that's undefended. And now e4 by Magnus. So what do you do here? Of course, here Nakamura would like to do some nice nasty discovery. For example, knight to d4 would be okay as it attacks the queen, also it attacks the bishop. The problem is if rook captures, you just lose the piece as the rook also guards the bishop on c4. So not something you want to do. So after e4, first Nakamura creates an outpost for the knight on d4. We have e5, creates an outpost for the knight, also does so without wasting time as the bishop on f4 is under attack. With bishop to e3, and only now Nakamura finds a way to trade more pieces with bishop to knight to d4. And now you have to react to this as your queen on c2 is under attack. So bishop captures, with rook captures on c4 now, keeping the bishop here on pre, with bishop captures on e5, and now what do you do here? Carlsen just grabbed a pawn here, so what can Nakamura do? Nakamura finds a very nice idea. Of course, you cannot play knight captures on e4, even though the knight on c3 is pinned, because your bishop here is hanging. So here Nakamura finds a very nice plan. First, bishop to a4, attacking the queen and the rook, and Magnus has to defend. Of course, the only defense is b3, so this is what Magnus does. And now you get knight captures on e4, winning back the pawn, and asking Magnus, what do you want to do here? So here Magnus has a couple of options. Queen to e2 is, well, the strongest one, but the one Magnus didn't find. He mentions this in an interview because then he had access to the engine. So queen e2 is a very nice line, because then you get rook captures on c3, and after b captures on e4, now rook to c5 with a double attack against the bishop here, but now bishop captures on g7. This is what you had to find, and after king captures, queen captures here, and you get this position where white is still up a pawn, but doesn't really matter, it's a doubled a pawn, but black's kingside structure is all messed up, so it would be better for Magnus. But Magnus finds a different one. He plays rook to d3, puts more defenders to the c3 square, and now rook e to c8 by Nakamura, bringing more pressure to the c file. Queen to b2 by Magnus, the strongest move, getting the queen out of the way, also putting more pressure to the g7 pawn. And now, what do you play here? Here Nakamura has to decide whether he wants to trade down into an endgame, which of course is possible, with rook captures on c3, and after bishop captures, you can just trade everything. You can go rook captures, queen captures on c3, queen captures, knight captures, and here after b captures on a4, you will capture with the knight, and here Nakamura would have pressure against the a3 pawn, and he could go into this being an exchange down with two connected pawns on the queen side, but he decides against it. Here, after queen to b2, Nakamura decides to mix it up. He plays knight to c5, attacks Carlsen's rook on e3, and here rook to e3. Just getting the rook out of the way, and here Nakamura plays bishop captures on b3, which is a very nice move, and now it's Magnus to play. Well, of course, it's also you to play, so feel free to pause the video here and try to find a good move for white in this really messy position. Well, I give you a couple of seconds, of course. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent snatcher of pawns on g7. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, bishop captures on g7 is the idea here. What happens? Well, of course, you cannot capture this because after knight d5 check, everything falls apart, you're in check, there's a double attack against the bishop here. King h7, you just get rook captures on e7, and there are so many threats here for white, you would just fall apart with black. So after bishop captures on g7, Nakamura played rook to g4, putting pressure on the g2 pawn, and also attacking the bishop here. Magnus said that he missed this move, but he didn't feel all that worried about it. He just played bishop captures on h6, getting the bishop out of the way, grabbing yet another pawn, and here with bishop to f6 by Nakamura, aligning the bishop with the queen on b2, also putting more pressure on the knight on c3, which is, you know, in a lot of ways the theme of this game. Nakamura putting pressure on c3 and Magnus trying to work around it. With knight to e5 by Magnus, and now what do you play here? You don't really have a good square for your rook here. You kind of want to keep your rook on the g file, but there's no room for the rook on the g file, so you have to move it away from the g file. The problem is, if you move it away from the g file, then white has too many threats along the g file. Rook g3 check, and black falls apart. King h7, now you get queen b1 check. You sacrifice the bishop, but only temporarily. You don't mind sacrificing the bishop for a nice mating attack. Queen to f5, and now there are too many threats. You're threatening to capture the bishop, but also there are so many other threats. For example, if bishop captures here, you're just going to checkmate the black king. Queen g5 check, and here you will just have a nice mate. So black cannot allow this, so of course he captures the monster knight. With bishop captures on e5, rook captures on e5, and now queen to b6, unpinning and also preparing to capture the bishop here. Magnus defends it with queen to d2, now guarding the bishop here, and Nakamura brings the rook back into the defense, but also with a double attack against the bishop here. Magnus retreats, bishop to e3, now again putting pressure and pinning the knight here, and now queen to c6, unpinning again, and also threatening mate. So what can Carlsen do about this? Here Carlsen plays knight to d5, and it's really just one of those nice moves that I'm going to use as a thumbnail, as he's threatening knight to e7, which just creates a monster fork here. Everything is connected, so you have to react to this. There's no way around it. So of course Nakamura captures it with bishop captures on d5, and now just queen captures on d5. Magnus offers a queen trade. Nakamura is not all that happy about it, so first b6, puts a defender here to the c5 knight, but now g3. Magnus also doesn't want to constantly keep an eye on this pressure on the g file. With knight to d7, attacking the rook, and now Magnus just trades with queen captures, rook g captures on c6, at the same time doubling up on the c file, and now, after all is said and done, Magnus is up a pawn. But more importantly, his 3-1 advantage on the king side will be, well, hard to deal with for Nakamura. And also there's play on both sides of the board. Magnus has a bishop, so bishop is a bit more useful than a knight when there's play on both sides of the board. With rook to d5 first, attacking the knight, and now knight back to f8. And here rook f to d1. Magnus doubles on the d file. With knight to e6 now, Nakamura increases the activity of the knight, and now a4. Magnus goes for a5. He wants to break, well, this very nice harmony of the two connected pawns on the queen side. With rook to c4, attacking the pawn, and now just rook to a5. Of course, Magnus wants to get rid of his pawn and leave black with only one pawn on the queen side. With rook to b4, defending on b6, but now just rook to d7, threatening to capture on a7. Of course, if you push a6, then of course Magnus will capture on b6. So here you have to trade. We have b captures on a5, rook captures on a7, and now a4. Nakamura pushes the passed pawn, but it will be very hard to push it any further, as it's Magnus who has a rook behind the passed pawn. So it's kind of difficult to get it going. Rook d to d7 by Magnus, and what do you do now? Of course, there are threats of capturing on f7, and if you capture this pawn, then the three connected passed pawns are just too much to deal with. With rook to d8 by Nakamura, defending f7, and now comes rook to d5 by Magnus. Knight back to e6, and here rook d to a5. Magnus doubles up on the a file and threatens the capture on a4. Nakamura, of course, defends, but by defending, this puts both of Nakamura's rooks in a pretty passive position, so you're not, well, even if the knight and the bishop get traded off, your rooks are very passive here. So here, Carlsen just played king to g2, and believe it or not, it was in this position that Hikaru Nakamura resigned the game. Might seem a bit premature, you know, resigning a game, as there's still so much going on, but black doesn't really have all that much to play here. And of course, Nakamura is, you know, a super grandmaster. He knows this and he doesn't want to play it out. One way to show this, for example, if black continues the game, you cannot move the rooks from the b or c file, as you would lose the a4 pawn. So what can you play? You can try some king g6, try and improve your king's position. White will play h4. You're going to go king to g6. Now you're going to get h5. Now you have to go back. King f6. Now you're going to go king to h3. So again, what can black play? You can't move the rooks away from the fourth rank. You can go rook e4. White is just going to now double up rooks on the 7th rank. Rook d7. You can play rook to b8. Prepare rook to f8 as you want to protect the f7 pawn. Let's say rook a7, now going after the pawn. Rook f8, and now g4. And black really doesn't have all that many moves. You're pretty much controlling everything here. You can go king g7. You're going to get g5. Knight, bishop nicely guards the g5 pawn. King g8, you're going to get h6, and black doesn't have anything to play. Rook to c4, you're going to go rook to e7, and I don't know, rook to e4, preventing rook captures on e6, as this is a pretty big threat. But after king g3, black again has to make a move. If you move this rook, you're going to lose the f7 pawn. If you move the knight, white trades down into a favorable endgame. If you move the pawn, you lose the pawn. And basically what you have left is just to move this rook and keep an eye on this pawn. But then rook captures on e6 happens and black falls apart. F captures, now you get the g6 and you're getting mated. You don't want to allow h7 and g7. to come with check and winning of the rook. So let's say rook d8, but then you get bishop g5. You attack the rook, and now it's over. Couple of more checks, and there are no more moves left. King g2, rook g4 check, king here. You can play here, king e2, and now you have to decide. Either you give up the rook, or it's rook to a8 checkmate. There's nothing much to do here. And this is basically with perfect play, but in any other way, Magnus would just win this. And of course, Nakamura knows this, and he doesn't even make an attempt to try anything here in this position against the world champion. So yeah, that's basically the game. I do hope you enjoyed it, and like I said, it's only one of the games that we're going to show. It was a very eventful round, so I will have to think carefully which is the next game I'm going to show tomorrow morning, but I do have a pretty strong feeling about the next game. And what we're really hoping, not hoping, but what we're really looking forward to seeing in round 7 is Magnus Carlsen against Jan Nepomniachtchi, as Carlsen will have to face his nemesis with the black pieces. And so far, of course, you know that Magnus Carlsen has never defeated Jan Nepomniachtchi in classical time format. They've drawn 5 games. Nepo beat Magnus 4 times, but Magnus has never defeated Jan Nepomniachtchi. So we'll see. It's going to be, I'm sure it's going to be a really crazy game, as Nepo has white and Nepo does not waste the white pieces. Nepo always likes the party, so it's really going to be great. Really looking forward to it. But before that, like I said, we're going to show at least one more game from this round. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Ed Wormald, Simon Johansson, Manuel Brnjak, Franz Hilbea, and Tim Garvin for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon continuing the Croatian Grand Chess Tour coverage, checking up on your suggestions, and it's unlikely that I will get a chance to continue the Capablanca saga while this is going on, but who knows, maybe I will. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Monday.